How's it going, everyone? Let me just move this kind of a bit of a messy desk situation out of the way. Oh, let's see. Get this out the way. How's everyone doing? Looks like we have 2 people joined. That's awesome. So, let's get some of this out of the way. I've been working on a new presentation over the last couple of days on Github Workspaces and like combining that with some blockchain stuff. So today I'm gonna kind of go over that. I'm gonna have my notes open as I go over it. As I've been looking here. So this is kind of a dry run before I start presenting at like meetups and stuff like that. How's it going, Jeff? So let's see, I have a bunch of different windows open right now because I've been testing different stream setups, been testing different camera setups. Honestly, OBS, which is like the tool used for streaming, is like just as complicated, if not more complicated, than any programming stuff I've ever done. Just hitting update here. Let's see, one moment. It's asking me to log in, confirm. Okay, cool. I'm all logged in. Got this open. Got this clicked through. A lot of tech here. Okay, so do I have my pencil? Yeah. Okay. So I got a good show and tell little mini presentation today on GitHub Workspaces, which I am so excited about. I'm so stoked about this. Now, I'll go through why in a moment, but over the last close to 6 years now, I've really found a niche in developer experience. So I've found a niche while working at the NFL, working at System 1, and even a little bit while working as a manager at Remo. I found this little niche of helping engineers do their jobs better. That's what I love doing. I love doing anything CI/CD, anything with automation, anything where I can remove headaches from engineers so they can actually build features. I'm really stoked about. So I've been really that's been my main focus probably close to the last 6 years, is either setting up some of the CI/CD stuff myself or teaching engineering teams how to do this. So while I've been going through this journey and figuring out ways to do this on my own as an engineer, I kind of came up with this idea of what I like to call the bug funnel. So it kind of looks like this. See if this works. Okay, cool. So you have a funnel here. Excuse my drawing. So if you worked in sales or marketing or anything like that before, you might have seen this. You have like the clients kind of come in through the top, like potential leads, and some buy the offer, some don't buy the offer. And the idea is on marketing and sales, you want to make this as wide as possible to catch as many clients as you can. And at the bottom, you get the sale here. So I realized we can use the same analogy for bugs, except instead of trying to widen the funnel, we want to shrink it. We want as few bugs coming through as possible. So if you have like a little bug up here, we want as few of these guys coming through the funnel as possible. So usually, the way we do that is we set up different checks and balances on each stage of the funnel, like through here. And the closer to the top of the funnel that you set up these checks and balances, the quicker you'll be able to fix the bug, and the more information you'll have to debug in the first place, and the less likely that a customer will end up seeing it. So at the bottom of the funnel, you have like sad customer. We don't want the bug going to the sad customer. That's the worst case scenario. So by default, the only check and balance engineering teams usually like set up by default is the bug goes through the funnel, hits the customer, and the customer complains. And you have this feedback loop of a bug coming through the top, the customer sees it and the customer complains. Again, usually when a bug is coming from a customer or a user, like you're getting no stack traces, you're getting no reproducibility. It's really, really frustrating to fix. So the idea is that we want to put checks and balances in other different parts of the funnel. So instead of the bug hitting the customer and seeing it, maybe we can test the code on a test environment. So the test environment might be here. And so you see this arrow is even shorter. So how about if we move up further up? Where else can we test? Well, we can test in the pull request. So maybe pull request is around here. And you get an even smaller feedback loop. And the nice thing here is these pull requests, you can test in both places. You can test in the test environment and you can test in the pull request. But if you have a check here, you don't have to do the same check down here. So if you have a unit test that gives you a huge amount of confidence that an API is going to work, you don't have to check that same API with an end-to-end test with Selenium. Really, it doesn't really matter. So the nice thing about doing checks here is you can have, a lot of the times it's easier to program in a check earlier in the pipeline, and that saves you from trying to make a flaky end-to-end test later. Okay, so we have the pull request step where we can do a check. Can we do better? What happens? We could do like a git commit hook, let's say. And so every single time someone commits on Git, it'll run some checks. Okay. Well, can we do better? What if we run a test as an engineer hits any key on the keyboard, it runs some tests. So now you have like this super tight feedback loop. Is when the engineer is actually like typing on the keyboard. And that's where tools like TypeScript, tools like ESLint, any static analysis comes into play, is you get this really nice, quick, fast feedback loop for testing. So that's all fine and good. Let's take some notes. That's all fine and good. But here's the problem. Setting up checks and balances on this right side over here is it's pretty doable because you as the engineer, you control the test servers and you control the production servers. Versus trying to set up checks and balances here traditionally requires you to like hook in to each developer's machine. So a really great example of this is while I was working at the NFL, I worked on the new React Native app at the NFL, and we started that from scratch. Like from the very beginning, I was on that project. And one of the things we needed to do was we needed an easy way to set up Android development, iOS development, and JavaScript development on not only every single engineer's laptop who is currently working at the NFL, but for any new engineer who would join. And since we were working with a lot of outside agencies, new engineers would come in and out of nowhere without warning. So the way I kind of got around that is I made this crazy detailed automation script. And the way I tested it was I had a virtual machine of macOS running on my machine, and I would run the test. I would literally wipe out the virtual machine, run the build script to set up all the React Native stuff, all the iOS, all the Android stuff, run it all the way through until it kind of broke, fix where it broke in the automation, wipe out the virtual machine, and run again. And then if it broke somewhere else down the line, wipe out the virtual machine and run again. It actually took me about 3 days to set this up, but the result was we had this one command you could run as an engineer that within 30 minutes installed Xcode, installed Android Studio, set up all the environment variables you need to do, installed Yarn, installed the right version of Node, and glued everything all together, which is great. So I took the process down from pretty much a whole day of a developer setting up their machine down to 30 minutes. this is all fine and good. However, in blockchain land, we're running into the same kind of developer tooling problems. Back in React Native land, when React Native was really young, the developer tooling would change so often that the main problem you would run into wasn't necessarily how does an engineer set up their machine from first principles. It's when the developer tooling changes, how do we update the engineer's machines to reflect those developer tooling changes? That was hard. The way we kind of got around it was we would add a new shell script and we would send a Slack message to everyone to run the shell script. And guess what? Like half the time, people wouldn't run the shell script. So that being said, that's the problem we're trying to solve too, is how do we update the developer tooling on an engineer's machine the same way we would update a website? And one kind of thought that's probably a few people have tried before is, what if instead of trying to update the developer's machine, we have the engineers use virtual machines? Now, anyone who's tried this before, it's been a really clunky experience. I've tried this at a company before, like years ago. I've tried this with Docker containers. It's never, the UI UX for using virtual machines for developer environments has never quite been that good until right now. And the tool that I want to go over now is a tool called GitHub Codespaces, which allows you to hook Visual Studio Code into a virtual machine out in the cloud somewhere on the Microsoft infrastructure that's faster than your current machine and solves that problem of being able to update developer environments for your whole engineering team. So I'm pretty stoked about that. So let's jump into some live coding side. So if we go to, here we go. Okay. So this is still, I think this is still in beta. I'm not sure. I actually had to talk to the GitHub sales rep to get access to this sooner, but they said that it should be out of beta like within the next week or so. So this is still really, really new. What I started with is I cloned, so what I want to go over is how to get GitHub Codespaces working with something with blockchain Solidity development. Because there isn't a template for this right now that I could find, but you really only have to modify a Node.js template. Jeff says, it isn't that different from VS Code connecting to a Docker image or a Linux subsystem. That's 100% true. It's actually using, under the covers, it's actually using the same tech for VS Code to connect into a Docker image or Linux subsystem. I'm a big fan of paying other people to manage my infrastructure. As someone whose job it was to manage their own, like doing a lot of DevOps stuff at startups like years ago, I'm a big fan of anything, anytime I can pay a little bit of money for someone else to manage something, I'm all about it. So since I own this organization, what I did was I cloned this Truffle starter kit from Smart Contract. So Smart Contract is the company that runs Chainlink, which is a really cool crypto, like a blockchain project that allows you to connect outside oracles to blockchain stuff. So if you wanted to get the weather, if you want to get the price of USD to Bitcoin, if you want to get any outside information outside the blockchain, you use Chainlink. So what I did here was I cloned their Truffle starter kit just because I wanted a real world project to demonstrate that you can add this like GitHub Codespace something into a real code base. So I didn't want to just make like a to-do list app. I wanted to use like some real code. So to get started, what you can do is when you enable GitHub Codespaces, let me close these windows. When you enable GitHub Codespaces, and for your organization, you can click this code button, and you'll see here that you now have different code spaces. So you can see from here, I already made one about 18 hours ago, made one a couple of days ago too. And so you can have different code spaces for different setups or different branches. But just for the sake of like demoing this right now, I'll just do a new code space. And here you can see you can have 2 cores, 4 cores, 8 cores, or 16 cores. This is like a Ferrari. This is 16 CPU cores, 32 gigs of RAM. I think this costs about $1 or $2 an hour to run. But for now, we can do like just a 2-core setup. I think this is like 8 cents an hour. It's like almost nothing. So we can click create code space. So now it's saying open in code space. And what I can do is open code space in VS Code desktop. And we can see it's loading here. Truffle starter kit, setting up remote connection. So I'm doing this live streaming with a bunch of data and stuff. So if this like is a little bit too slow, I already have one backed up. But as you can see, even while I'm streaming with a bunch of internet stuff all happening all at once, it's going pretty quick. So we actually have the code space cloned here. It's now detected that it uses node 14 and it's running npm install to install all the dependencies. And like you can see, this is just VS Code. Like, just to compare with, here's VS Code running on my machine with the project cloned locally, no code space, and here's VS Code running remote. It's like pretty much identical, down to even some of the terminal colors. So that's great. That was only like 1 or 2 button clicks. So if we wait for this to install a little bit, it might take a little bit to install. So going through here, we have package.json file, which has a few run commands here, and we have a Truffle config. So our goal now is we want to try to get compile, console dev, and console covin. We want to actually, let's make our goal to get all these run scripts running on this remote machine. So to kind of get started there while this is installing, what we can do is if we hit Command-Shift-P, actually, if we hit Command-Shift-P and then type in, what is it, dev container? Yeah, you'll see we have this add development container configuration files. So clicking on that, we can pick a template. So the template I like to use, since this has a bunch of JavaScript in it already, it has JavaScript and Solidity. Let's just use this Node.js template and do 16 just for default. Then, as you can see here, it pops out this dev container.json file and a Docker file. So this Docker file is the, like Jeff mentioned, this is the image that's running the development environment. So you can customize this to your heart's content, just like any Docker image. And so since we are using a, we're trying to do like a Solidity blockchain project with Truffle, let's customize this a little bit, because by default, it doesn't have Ganesh, I think it's pronounced Ganesh, Ganesh or Truffle installed. And normally you have Truffle Ganesh installed as global packages because you use it for a lot of stuff for Solidity. So we can just do npm install g Truffle Ganesh CLI. I think that's the command. Let me double check my notes. Yeah. Hit save. So that updates the Docker file. Inside this dev container.json file, you also can start customizing to your heart's content. Now this is really great because I notice on every team there's always like one person, at least one person, who's really into editing their text editor, and 90% of the people don't really care. And so what happened, at least at NFL or System 1, I was the guy who was really into editing my text editor. And so I would just share my settings by like going to each of my coworkers' laptops and showing them how I set stuff up. What you can do now with this dev container JSON file is you can pre-install a bunch of extensions for VS Code. So if you know your whole team's going to be working on blockchain projects, or your whole team's going to be working on these Node.js projects, you can add some of these extensions ahead of time. So here's a good example. Extensions. So let's say right now by default it's adding VS Code ESLint, but let's also say we want every engineer on the team to have Prettier and to have the Solidity plugin. So instead of telling everyone to install it, by default, when they clone this now, or when they make a workspace from here, we'll have it install Prettier and Solidity. Something else we can do, forward ports. So this is make a list of ports inside the container available locally. This is pretty great. So even though this is on like a remote machine, we can forward the ports on the remote machine, so you can then connect to the container through your browser just like it's running on your machine. So for Solidity and Truffle projects, I know 8545 and 7545 are two really common ports to be forwarded. So I'm going to add that here. And then finally, we have this post create command. So this is handy. This solves a problem that I've run into a bunch. I'll often, like when I was working as an engineer at System 1, I'll make a change to like an NPM package. Then I tell everyone in the Slack channel to run npm install again because there's a change. And 100% of the time, there'd be at least 3 people within the next 5 days come to me and say, oh, James, this isn't working. And then I'd have to tell them, like, hey, run npm install. So just do npm install here. And now whenever someone opens up the workspace, or anytime a new container is created, anytime a new Codespace is created, it's going to automatically run npm install. So it's eliminated that problem of people saying, hey, James, how come this isn't working? Because it'll just automatically run it. And then let's see if there's any other cool little things I can add. Go through here. This is a variant. So this is, you notice inside the Docker file, there's an environment variable. Defaults to 16 buster, but you could also change it in here. And that should be it. So actually, this is really good timing. Now it's all done running npm install. And as you can see, this is just like, the only thing that tips you off that this is a Codespace is this green Codespace word, really. Otherwise, like, there's like no lag. You can run all the same commands you want. It's really just like developing on your local machine, which is pretty cool. So notice here, I changed dev container. I hit save, and now it's saying, we've noticed you made a change to the dev container configuration, rebuild the container to reapply them now. So we can just click rebuild. It's warning us that it recreates your Codespace, but any code changes will be preserved. So we could rebuild. Again, rebuilding should be a bit quicker now because we've built it once before, but let's take a look. So it's connecting. Oh. Questionable. Oh, cleaning up Docker images. Give this a moment. Okay, so it's pulling the Docker image. So I'm seeing some questions from Jeff. Isn't that different? Okay, what is the ports tab next to the terminal? Oh, ports tab next to the terminal. Once it connects, you'll see that ports tab again. That's just showing what ports are like, what processes are trying to access different ports on the container itself. So this is really, really handy for debugging if you've ever worked with Docker before, sometimes you'll have the server running in the Docker container, and you try to connect it to port 3000 or whatever, and you're like, I don't get it. Like, I see it running in the container, but you forget to forward the port. Here it shows every single process that's trying to connect to an outside port and whether or not it can. And if it can't, you can, that's where you can say like, oh, okay, let's forward the port. The ease of that creation would be super useful locally. I'm not totally on board with remote machines like this, but I am a cheap person. So I've been interested in the idea of extensions being enabled, disabled on the workspace. I think your broadcast is really low volume. Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to change the preamp. How about now? Can you hear me now? That should be a lot better. That should be a lot better. Okay, I can see the signal. Yeah, it's hitting yellow now. Okay, perfect. Thanks for that. So I'm pretty cheap. It's so funny that you mentioned about being cheap, because I'm pretty cheap too when it comes to like setting spending limits for myself. So on my GitHub account, I have a $10 American US spending limit. But it was funny because when we were at System 1, we had like, our spending limit was, I don't even think we set a spending limit. We were spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on servers. And like, so whenever I'm at work, it's like, oh, that's only $10,000. Sure, let's go. But then when I'm at home, I was like, oh, $8 for an SSL certificate. Let me spend the next 2 hours trying to set up Let's Encrypt. So where this is really handy is if you're in a team and you have like 100 engineers, then if you really wanted to be clever, instead of getting them each a $3,000 MacBook or a $2,000 MacBook, you could get them a cheaper MacBook. And the amount you'd spend per day, I did the math, and I think for a 2-core machine, the amount you spend per day is like $2, assuming like an 8-hour workday. So that's where it gets interesting. And then from an accounting perspective, if you want to be really clever, is you can write off the entire $2 a day instead, compared to like when you buy a MacBook, it's just like you can only write off the depreciation. So that's kind of clever too. Oh, like still profitable, like the server. So I worked a lot in like publishing and ad tech. So yeah, it was all about scale. It was all about getting as many users to a website as possible because we would make money on the ad impressions. So when you're dealing with like millions of users per day, like that's just how much it costs to run the servers, because the servers are getting so much freaking traffic. Compared to like if you're working on a tool that only like 100 people are using, then yeah, you shouldn't be spending very much money at all. So let's see here. There's a bunch of warning messages. Okay, so now it looks like, you notice here, it's running. This is the example of the new command we added. We had this run npm install g truffle ganesh CLI. So that was from the that's the command we added to the bottom of the Docker file. Okay, that's been run. New minor version available. Let's take a quick look. Again, the nice thing about this is just like when you're running Docker on your local machine, this command gets cached. So the first time you run a lot of these commands, they're a bit slow, but afterwards they're cached. So that means other people on your team like other people on your team using these Codespaces don't have to wait as long. So I read a great article on the GitHub engineering team. So all of GitHub, every engineer at GitHub now is using Codespaces, like to make GitHub itself. And I saw some cool little tricks they're doing at GitHub. Things like building the image like at night. So when people wake up the next day and like log onto the Codespace, it's just like that. So the amount of time that this is going to save multiplied across like 100, 200 person, 1,000 person engineering teams, it's like kind of mind blowing. like just being able to tighten up that loop at the end. So we have click here. One moment, my screen is a little bit, I clicked away from something, so now my screen is like, oh, double mice, okay. One moment. There we go. Okay, now I'm back. Container started. So we can see the Docker run command here. It looks like, I'm guessing it's tagging it with a git hash. Oh, and then setting up remote connection, fetching Codespace details. So that was rebuilding the container for the Codespace. And now we're connecting to the Codespace again. And see, and this is that post create command npm install. So it's running that npm install command there too. So if we go to, we can actually open up a terminal on the side here as it's running npm install. And as you can see just running terminal, you can run whatever terminal command you want, basically. But now, since we have, and since we ran that Truffle and Ganesh CLI command, if I run Ganesh CLI help, oh, -- help. We have it installed. So Ganesh is a way, it's part of the Truffle toolkit for making smart contracts. It's a TLDR, it's a way of running like a test Ethereum blockchain on your machine. So you can test your smart contracts against it. So if we look at these npm scripts now, we have compile, we have console dev, console Kovan. Kovan is the name of one of the Ethereum test networks. So Ethereum has multiple test networks. And imagine a test net as, it's basically a staging server for everybody. So it's there's like 4 or 5 test nets for Ethereum that you can just connect to and test whatever Ethereum smart contracts you want to do. So it's like a big shared staging server across the entire ecosystem. So if we do, next step we want to do is we want to run this migration script against dev. So it looks like when you run npm run migrate dev, it's doing truffle migrate reset network cl dev. And if we open up this truffle config.js, we can see under networks, cl dev is localhost post 8545. So this, in order to connect to here, you have to be running that Ganesh CLI in the background. So if you run Ganesh CLI, no. Let me close this. Clear. Oops. So now it's running an Ethereum wallet on local machine. The gas limit is max limit. Call gas limit is this. Now it's listening here. I'm just going to close this npm install step because I don't think we need to worry about it. Actually, I'll keep it running. So if I open up a new, I'll open up a new terminal here. So now that Ganesh server is running in the background. So if I run npm migrate dev, this should work. fetching Solidity, compiling the smart contracts. And then ran the migration. So these migrations, just like database migrations, your application is running in port 8545 is available. So if I click open in browser, you can see there isn't a whole lot. This isn't too fancy, but you can see it opened the browser on 8545. So it's forwarding the port correctly. This server doesn't have a UI. So even though this says 400 batch requests, is still correct. This is still forwarding the port from the local machine to the remote VM. So this is actually running on the remote virtual machine Codespace. And if we go check here, you can see that in this Truffle log here, that all the migrations ran. So the migrations are just like the database migrations, but instead of having like a MySQL database, like the local blockchain you're running, you're using that database. So that migrate dev script works. Let's see if console dev works. So npm run console dev. So any console commands you want to run, you can run here. And then finally, console dev and migrate dev are all fine and good for running locally. But if we want to like write a smart contract that interacts with Chainlink, interacting somewhere outside, it's still pretty difficult to do that locally. So the easier way to kind of set that up is to run it on one of the Ethereum test networks. So the way you can do that here is by running these migrate Kovan or these console Kovan commands. Kovan's the name of one of the test networks. But if you look, if we go to truffleconfig.js, see cldev, you can see Ganesh, Binance testnet, and Kovan. So here it's asking for a mnemonic and a URL. So a mnemonic, for anyone who has a crypto wallet, this is that like 20-word phrase that gets spit out when you create a new Ethereum wallet. And with that 20-word phrase, you can basically recreate that wallet anywhere. And then the our RPC URL, that is a bridge from like the internet here, like HTTP servers, to the Ethereum network. Okay, so both of these, you can't really share this information across the engineering team. It's tricky because if you're running test code, you really want to test it just with your own wallet most of the time, because if you give the mnemonic to a bunch of different people, they'll all be withdrawing and depositing from your test wallet. So it'd be really hard to test. And it's also similar with an RPC URL. Generally, you want your own RPC URL. But if you notice here, it's using environment variables. And so that's tricky to map on because this is a remote machine. So what we can do instead is, if you notice, they're using this require.inf.config. This is an npm package that basically looks for file called .env and sucks up the environment variables from there. So we're going to do that. We're going to do touch.env. You notice this is already in the git ignore. This is important to be in the git ignore because this usually has sensitive information. And this time, just to kind of demo, I'm going to put in my keys, but they are sensitive, so I'm going to like move this window out the way because I don't want y'all to see my wallet stuff. And what we can do is going to copy the notes, move this window out the way. And to copy the notes, 1 sec. Put this back here, paste here, save, close, and then put this window back there. So I've just put my environment variables, my mnemonic, and my RPC URL in that .env file. So now if we want to try connecting to Coven, the test network, I can do npm run console Coven, trying to connect to the Coven network, and it doesn't work. Unknown arguments format passed. Oh, okay, I remember. In order to get so the GitHub Codespace, what the Codespace itself will do is it actually looks for this .env file and it sucks up the environment variables from there. So in order for that to work, we have to rebuild the Codespace. So if I do Codespaces, rebuild container, connecting, cleaning up Docker images, and downloading this here. Running. So my expectation was this would be cached, but it looks like it's not. That's interesting. I should look into that after. I'm going to take a note. Okay, while this is running, is there any questions about any of this? A lot. I'm still learning a lot of this as I go. So the two things I've been putting my time on, all three things, have been studying Chinese every day. It's freaking hard. Working on some presentation skills, like learning OBS and learning the tech behind this, because it looks like I'll be doing virtual presentations for at least another year with the way this whole pandemic's going. And I've been really looking into blockchain development stuff. The good news is, if you already have experience as an engineer, all this blockchain stuff is basically stuff you already know, except they just renamed everything. So instead of using JavaScript, you're using Solidity, but it's like not that much different. It's kind of annoying that it's object-oriented, but whatever. That's personal preference. It's more the tooling that I'm really trying to learn more on this side. And this is the big reason why I'm so excited about the idea of Codespaces, is because if I figure out this tooling, I can set it all up in a really nice code space and share that. And then that'll lower the barrier of entry for anyone else who wants to do this kind of thing. Because instead of them worrying about whether or not we use like Truffle or whether we use hard hat or blah, 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 as this whole ecosystem updates, because it's still very bleeding edge, it's updating all the time, we can just keep updating Codespaces. Has the hype train died down in Bitcoin? If you look at the price, it's gone down. I think Bitcoin, from a usability perspective, I feel like Bitcoin is very much like, on the technology side, I feel like Bitcoin is very much like version 1. Like Bitcoin's like the COBOL. Like, it was great. I'm really glad it came out. But where I'm more interested in from a technical perspective, not from like an investment or speculations perspective, I'm more interested in what's happening in Ethereum land. Because Bitcoin, there's really only one kind of code that runs on Bitcoin, and that's the whole, like, just the commerce side, like sharing coin from one another. You can kind of make smart contracts with Bitcoin if you want to get all academic about it, but not really. Versus the tooling on Ethereum lets you make, the big one for Ethereum is lets you make these smart contracts and these decentralized apps. So, for example, here's a good example. While this is loading, I'll just do a little bit of show and tell. Example, if I go to, where is Firefox? So here's a great example of one of my favorite decentralized apps, and it's Pooled Together. So what you can do is, this is like a non-loss lottery. So what that means is, let me just type in my password. So this is the future here. I'm going to show you the future. So this website doesn't have a way of logging in. So traditionally, the way you would log into a website is, there's like, you know, MySQL database with like your user ID and your password, and logging in, seeing the state that you have on this application is you do, like, you type in your username and password, it goes to an application server, goes to the database, checks, and then logs you in and pulls your data. So the really, really fascinating thing about these like decentralized apps is they don't have that. All the data is already on this Ethereum blockchain. So what I mean by that is, if I do connect to wallet, I can click on MetaMask. And so MetaMask, this is an Ethereum wallet that's running as a web browser. So I can unlock it. And now, MetaMask is kind of like the glue that connects the web world, the web UI world, with this like Ethereum blockchain. So now if I go to rewards, let's say, where's my pools? Okay, actually I have it on the Polygon network. One sec. So right now what I'm doing is I'm switching to a different network. It's called Polygon instead of Ethereum. And the reason why is this has lower fees of TLDR. But if I go to pools here, so I have some money in this pool here. Let's see. I think the UI changed. I can't find it. So this is showing a UI to the Ethereum blockchain. And on the Ethereum blockchain, there's a decentralized app called Pooled Together. And what Pooled Together lets you do is it lets you and your buddies put money into a pool. And that money, like, so right now this is a USDC pool. So all that USDC goes in a pile and collects interests using like some DeFi protocol like Aave or SushiSwap or something. So it's collecting interest. And what happens is every 10 days, instead of you getting a little bit of interest on like 100 USDC, every 10 days you have the chance to win all the interest collected from the entire pool. So I put in like, I think I put in like $100 in here, and I have like a 1 in 300 chance every 10 days of winning about $2,000. And then now the fascinating thing about this is I can take the principal out. There's like a cool-off period. I only have to hold the principal in there for 10 days, but I can take it out. And so it's like buying a lottery ticket, except imagine if you bought a lottery ticket from the 7-Eleven and you came back, you didn't win the lottery, and you hand your ticket back and they give you the $5 back. That's pretty crazy. Now, the other fascinating thing about this is because all this data is just on Ethereum, like if you pull up Etherscan, you'll see like, I think for example, this is on the Matic network. Trouble loading your balances, you can view them here. So if we look at my wallet ID, oh. So you see, like, these are just different UIs pointing to the same data. So it's pointing to my wallet address. We see that I have like this much Ethereum, this much wrapped Ethereum, this much USDC coin, and SushiSwap LP token, Uniswap position, which is some NFTs, and this pool together USDC token. So these are two different UIs pointing to the same data. One UI is very much like kind of just like an Excel spreadsheet, but this UI is using it to represent like a lottery ticket. So this is showing that I have 100 pool together community USDC, which means that I put that $100 into the pool together smart contract. So this is where this gets really interesting with things like NFTs. Imagine you make a video game, and in that video game you have a character. And that character, like their stats, their name, like some attributes about them, that's stored on Ethereum. That means someone else could make a game, a completely different game, and read that character data in their game. So that's where it gets really interesting. Now you can start making like video game characters that are you. You can have a video game character and transfer it from game to game to game to game. This also gets really, really interesting for social media. Imagine if there's a way to export all your Twitter posts, all your Facebook posts, all the social media content you ever made, throw it onto a blockchain, and now you just have a bunch of different UIs surfacing that data in different ways. So now none of that data is like owned by a central source. There's transparency to all your data. That's where things get really, really interesting. So like Bitcoin, yeah, like the money side, that's cool. Like DeFi, I think is really cool for now, but that's definitely, I definitely feel like that's like step 0, step 1. Like Bitcoin was step 0. These like initial smart contract stuff, this is like step 1. I think step 2 and 3 is going to be creating NFTs, creating tokens that you can share across different virtual worlds. Whether that's a video game, whether that's a social media thing, whether that's something we haven't even thought about. This is why I'm so like interested in this space right now, is we're still trying to figure out what we can do with it. And I think that's really cool. So it's similar to VR, like virtual reality. We're still trying to figure out what we can do with it, different user experiences. The problem with virtual reality is I feel like it's way more complicated than this. And this is pretty complicated. And what I mean by that is like, there's just a lot of technology stuff I don't even really understand on that. And I think that's going to be slower adoption than this stuff. So that's why I'm very, very, very bullish on anything to do with blockchain cryptocurrency stuff right now, because I really do feel like we're at the bottom of the wave, and the wave is just about to move over. And I think this is going to be the next wave to jump on, where there's going to be a ton of opportunity. So I think the last wave to jump on with this much opportunity was mobile, like mobile web. Now that's over. That's pretty much like, it's been commoditized. The tooling for JavaScript and website development and mobile development is so easy to use now that pretty much any engineer can pick it up. Here, the tooling is still so young and so it's still kind of like sketchy and still like not that stable that it's not that easy to develop for. But getting in early here, I think is going to be the next thing to get in early on that side, if that makes sense. So now I'm just looking at the chat. Now I want to see how it does that color changing on that site's text. Yeah, the color changing is fun. So all these things are on Ethereum. Are they each currencies? So currently, everything I've shown here, this is on Ethereum. But this is where it gets even more interesting. Now there's different, because Ethereum had that first mover advantage, like they were kind of the first thing that gained popularity for making smart contracts. What's happening is other blockchains are coming up that are Ethereum compatible. So what do I mean by that? So right now, I'm actually looking at this through the Polygon sidechain. So just for simplicity's sake, Polygon is a different, like, this is like the high-level simple side to explain it. Polygon is actually different implementation of Ethereum that's faster and has lower fees. You can see here the Binance Smart Chain, same idea. It's a different implementation of Ethereum that's faster. And then even like Cello, I don't even know what Cello is. I just saw it now. Like, that's how fast this space is moving. But the idea is even the newer smart contract things, like even Solano, which kind of just became really popular recently, that has a way of being compatible for Ethereum. So Ethereum kind of got that first mover advantage of that network effect of sucking in. People started making these like distributed apps on Ethereum. So now when new blockchains come out, generally they're all coming out. Well, not all, but generally the kind of smarter ones are being Ethereum compatible. So this is all sitting on top of Ethereum. So this is an example. This was looking at my wallet address on Polygon. If I want to look at my wallet address on Ethereum, I can do, how do I do this? I think I can just copy. This is my wallet address on Ethereum. So if we go here, so same thing there. So this is, so if you kind of think about it in a really high level way, you think of this blockchain stuff as the database, and then you can build different UIs on top of the database, roughly. That's kind of how a lot of people are kind of using this now too. But Pool Together is definitely my go-to example of like an easy to explain, like really nice, easy to explain use case for this. That's kind of it's still finance related because it's like lottery, but compare that to trying to explain Uniswap to someone, or like SushiSwap to someone. This one's fun because even like my girlfriend understands the idea of like a lottery. But I remember I showed her this. She's like, I still like the scratch-off tickets better. I'm like, that's funny. So if I move my mouse here, there. So that lottery thing, when it's simple to be able to buy multiple tickets to increase your chances of winning. Yes, you can buy multiple tickets to increase your chances of winning. As you can kind of see here, some people have done that. Like this guy here, he put in $200,000 worth of tickets. And so he has more chance of winning than someone else. I wouldn't say it's simple because you have to earn $200,000 first, or like earn $73,000 first. But yeah, the more money you put in, the more chance you have of winning. However, the more money you put in, the more interest is generated also, which incentivizes other people to jump in the pool too. So for example, like this is a prize of $2,000. If this prize was only like $10, like I wouldn't be incentivized to purchase a lottery ticket, basically. But since the prize is like $2,000, which is a good amount of money, and the odds of winning for me, I think it was on this page. It shows you. I can't remember. I can't find the page that shows me the odds for what I bought, but the odds for me when I last checked yesterday was like 1 in 300. That incentivized me to jump in because the odds seem good and the prize seems good. And when I jump in, the prize pool gets even larger. So that'll incentivize someone else to jump in. And when someone else jumps in, it gets larger and larger. So it's a combination of, yeah, you increase your chances when you dump like $10,000 in. However, you also increase the incentive for other people to jump in. So it kind of like causes a pool here. So a good example here is this Ethereum USDC pool has a $43,000 weekly prize, which is bonkers, right? However, like there's so many people in this pool, and like this guy has $17 million. You're in finance, USDC users has so much cash in there that the odds of winning this are pretty low. However, if you do win it, you could still win this by only depositing $10. So I like to recommend this to, I'm okay with recommending this to people who are kind of newer to crypto, because I would prefer, if someone's going to speculate, I'd rather have my friends and family speculate on something where they can get their principal back. So the great thing about this is as long as USDC stays stable, which I have good faith in, I think I trust Coinbase enough to make this stablecoin stable, you can always get your principal back. And so this gives you that rush, this emotional rush of speculating with very low risk, versus if you just, like, especially like friends and family members who don't really understand this, don't have much experience investing, if they're just going to buy Bitcoin or just buy Ethereum and speculate on the price, it could go down. Versus if you buy USDC and you're speculating on this, you still get that rush. You still get the like little gambling dopamine hit. But when you decide to grow up, you can take your principal back. So that's what I like about that, is it still gets people into crypto, but with way less risk of people just speculating. But yeah, it's insane. The money moving through this. The other thing I'm really excited about this space is not only the money that's being moved by like people investing anonymously, but the amount of money that VC firms is pouring into this is bonkers. For example, Solano had a hackathon a few months ago. I think they had like 30 people apply. And halfway through the hackathon, before the winners were even announced, I think 2 or 3 of the teams got like $2 million in funding each from like Andreessen Horowitz or some big VC firm. Like it's hot. So that's why it's really worth learning how to develop all this stuff in my opinion. But that being said, I gotta head out. Thanks again for everyone for joining. Hopefully you kind of learned something. We went on a tangent in the end on some of that pull together stuff. Streaming every week, same time. I'm still trying to figure out how to use Restream. Like I try to set up a schedule so it automatically pings people, but it hasn't quite worked yet, but that's fine. Streaming every week, same time. If you have any engineering questions, crypto questions, whatever, feel free to drop the questions in my Discord channel, which I will